Welcome everyone to our second round of artist talks for Give Me Space, New Prints 2020 Summer. If you joined us a few weeks ago in July for our artist talks, you are already familiar with the exhibition, but this is our first New Prints exhibition that we've done online only. It was juried by Chitra Ganesh, who did a very thoughtful job with the exhibition and organized it around a series of 5 themes. So if you haven't already, I would welcome everyone to go online. You can go on to our normal website, ipcny.org, and it'll bring you to the exhibition website and look around and see all of the excellent work that we have on view in this kind of new virtual format. So today we're going to be hearing from 3 of the artists in the exhibition, and we're really excited to hear about their work, not just what's in the exhibition, but kind of their general practices as well. And I would invite everyone who is over Zoom or on Facebook to ask questions throughout the program tonight. So please, if you're asking a question, write which artist that it's for, and we will try to get to all of the questions after each artist speaks, or if we kind of have some leftover questions or questions that are kind of more general and might be addressed possibly to all 3 of the artists, we are going to do a little bit of question and answer again at the end after each artist has kind of presented. So it is my pleasure to start off and welcome Golnar Adili to speak a little bit about her work, show us some examples of her work, and yeah, talk about what she has to show us.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to go, first of all, I want to thank IPCNY because it's a very democratic application that you just applied to and ongoing, and so many new prints shows. Big fan. And also to a holler to Chitra Ganesh for such a tight-knit exhibition, and exciting too, and very of the day thematically. I'm a mixed media artist.
Your video looks good.
Okay, great. I'm a mixed media artist and I dabble in everything, but I've found myself more and more in the print world and surrounded by printers. I like the more immediate processes, and with my background in architecture, I love paper, but also structure and material, and to push boundaries of everything into everything else. I thematically work with identity, meditating on my identity and the events of my life that have caused trauma, and therefore I love investigating emotions and then eventually, hopefully, healing. I love repetition and deconstruction and reconstruction. So this is I use the image of the chest, and you'll see it throughout in different ways. It was originally inspired by my love for the body, but also in Persian literature, it is a placeholder for emotions, and also a specific verse of poetry from a short poem from Yadullah Royai, 1,000 pages of chest and 1,000 pages of mirror, really sparked a lot of visuality. And I was like, what does that look like, that phrase? And so here I have interwoven, one day I got really angry from a rejection from art, and I wove my mother's eyes from her passport photo from the early 80s, which it reoccurs in my work because it's related to when our family became separated because of geopolitical situation between Iran and the US in my chest. Again, it's her eyes photolithoed, and there is a laser cut of two words repeated and making a pattern. Dust of Sorrow is the two words from borrowed from a Hafiz poem that I love, and I keep working with that poem. Here, this is transfer, a simple transfer. And on the left, that was the first image, the piece I created from that poem, 1,000 Pages of Chest and 1,000 Pages of Mirror. And I was very much wanted to kind of inspired by the image itself and the curves to make a cut that then makes a topography by stacking. I'm also teaching a class at the Center for Book Arts called Seeing Topographies, where I will explore that method or way of thinking of extruding 2D into 3D. And whatever was left on the right, I kept, but I didn't think it was a piece until way later, which when I made it into a piece, I really wanted to exhibit it together. And then once I did a residency at the Center for Book Arts, I found the clamshell box form perfect for putting them together. Before that, it was very contrived. I didn't like when I would put it together, but this closes the negative and the positive volumes. I love distortion, again, through repetition and movement. This is an accordion book, and it extrudes the chest image. I did a residency at the Lower East Side print shop in 2009, and I absolutely loved it. This is one of the first pieces that I did multiples of image transfer of my mother's letter to my father, again from the early 80s, where it's very emotional letter, and I have been working with my father's archive. He kept everything very neatly. Kind of like wanting to tell a story, and after he passed away, I felt like I wanted to tell that story, but it took a while. Anyways, I wanted to give depth to this letter, and so I recreated it in a way. This is like about 23 reproductions cut in a staggered way and folded. Therefore, you can't really read it easily, but with difficulty, which translated my relationship to that letter. You have to move around it because I wanted to read it, but I didn't want to read it because I remembered those events and it was hurtful. This is a side view, sorry. Again, when I became a mother, I didn't have time to just run to the print shop, so I said, can I make a stacked situation from just one image, one transfer? And this was my solution of the accordion system. And the cool thing was that I actually embedded all the leftovers in my studio inside and made a book. This is the piece at the IPCNY right now. Again, inspired by my toddler's play blocks, I said, why not I use it and tell my story and you know, to play with the images. So I found this book cover structure, box structure, really good for this because as it unfolds, it tells the story. And then for example, the image of the airplane is what took my father when he escaped Iran on his last leg of journey from Madrid to the US, and he had kept this ticket. So like all these very important images and texts that kind of hint at that story of the early 80s. Rearrange blocks. I love nesting boxes. This is a clamshell box inside of another clamshell box, which opens into a topography, which I don't know if you remember that extruded chest image. When it's closed, it becomes that. And then, I mean, this is the negative of it then. And then the image on the right is like the negative of that. It's beeswax. I love technology, and whenever I get my hands on a laser cutter, I want to experiment with it. So I did a laser cut woodcut, and I really loved the matrix more, which is usually what happens with matrices and prints. You see the print in the background. Then I did a residency at LMCC, and I got hooked with the 3D printer at NYU, and I made that 3D print of a pattern of a word, again from a Hafiz poem, that I then, in another residency where I could experiment with ceramics, pressed it into clay. I don't know very much about ceramics, but I would love to go back to it. And then I printed on a ceramic on the lower left, that little tray. I'm crisscrossing 2 words here with, again, 3D printer, Benshinan, Benshana, from a Hafiz poem, the same Hafiz poem. I love the way he creates tension with very similar words or verbs, or sometimes identical but meaning different things. I printed the same, another verb, chine-colle, on this silk, just wanting to look at translucency and the poetry becoming a scrim. This was shown at spring break. Again, I love language, and I looked here at my father's letter, 11 pages, and I extracted all the yes, which is equivalent to the English Y. And I put it chronologically and put the words that they come from inside their bellies of the yes. So this is kind of, I was drawn to the yeah because it's very, it's the curve hints at emotions, and I wanted to diagram the emotions of my father as he was writing. And then I wanted to make this into 3D. So I took all the parameters, like the distances between the yes, and constructed this installation. And this can all be taken apart and stacked. So it is kind of a feat of engineering, I'm proud to say. Yeah, I just wanted to look at them in space, the back view. During COVID, I had some time in space, thankfully. And so I couldn't go anywhere. So I thought, I'm going to do books. And I love book arts because of that, because you can really be independent for at least a lot of it. And so I started to put together language, Persian alphabet. I love Persian language, alphabet, and deconstruction, again, reconstruction. And so I started with this phrase, Baba Abdad, which means father gave water, but all the elements are in the middle at first. You open it, and then you can put it into place, which is also kind of didactic, teaching language through texture, tactility, and kind of how kids learn language. And then as a byproduct, I wanted to make some more affordable pieces. So those are the alphabets there. Hopefully I will one day sell them to fund my larger books projects. This is in the bottom is a prototype that is almost there. So hopefully I'm going to edition it very soon. Last but not least is another prototype underway, which is the full Persian alphabet in one box. It's not very perfect because I didn't have good cutters or large cutters at home, but it's the best I could do. With that, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. So if anyone would like to go into the Q&A within Zoom, or if you're watching streaming from Facebook, you can comment any questions for Golnar about her work. I'm actually, Golnar, going to have you stay for a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I'm going to see if we have some questions come in. And in the meantime, looking at your work, you had mentioned at one point having a tendency towards sort of falling in love with the matrix. How often do you show the matrix for the work alongside the kind of resulting print?
So because I don't have too many matrices, because I'm usually transferring, so I have to, get rid of the photocopy or the copy print. I honestly, my preference is always to show. I mean, if I get a chance, I would love to show it. And actually, one of the things that I proposed, to apply to this round was that laser cut woodcut. So in a way, almost every time I'm disappointed at the print. I don't know. And love the materiality of the matrix. So
great. So we have a question coming in that asks, when the two sides of the clamshell box go together, what happens to the two parts? Do they fit together, but since it's closed, nobody sees them?
Exactly. But hopefully the feeling of completing one thing or these two parts, I don't know, does something. Yeah, but they fit inside each other.
Yeah. I imagine there's a real kind of it's like very like satisfying, the like kind of tactile nature of them kind of fitting together like that.
Yeah, it doesn't click or anything, but and there's something interesting that happens because they are not exactly each other's molds because of the way it's stacked. Yeah, but they also fit, but not perfectly, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I leave a little bit of, I take into account all that when I'm making the clamshell.
Right.
I love the clamshell for that and not what it's really meant for.
I feel like that's sort of a theme is you like using the thing, but not maybe the way that it's traditionally used.
Yeah, I almost like as soon as I learn something, I break the rule. And sometimes I want to hold myself a little longer, but like I just can't. So
someone is asking what your relationship to and background in sculpture is like, because obviously we saw the example of one of your works kind of translated to sculpture.
what is my relationship to sculpture? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I love sculpture. I really consider that also as part of my practice. You know, a lot of the sculpture that I love is very, how do you say, tectonic. So like parts coming together in a very orderly fashion and kind of a construction. And then I also love the mold, the concrete, the pouring, which is a very different kind of sculpture. And I like to do both. And sometimes when I do too much of the constructed, cut pieces, I want to balance it by saying, okay, let's use a material that pours, that cures, and that's heavy, and it's not sheets and stacked. So, yeah.
Great. I got one more. What's your opinion? So someone is asking, what's your opinion on the block format versus the curves in the very typical Persian script that you used previously?
Right. So wherever, I'm not interested in calligraphy. That is another kind of art that I don't want to dabble in. I'm not interested in. Whenever you see that I'm using language that is not pixels, it's because I'm investigating a certain person's writing. Mm-hmm. And it's really about that kind of investigation and like comparison. But the block thing I'm very interested in because I call it my own typography because it makes it very objective, and it says that I'm not interested in calligraphy and that I'm really interested in the structure of the letters, and it makes it contemporary, I feel like, and speaks to pixels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thank you so much. So now we are going to ask Ethan Lauesen to join us, and we will be rejoined by everybody at the end, but now it is going to be Ethan's turn. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Hi, my name is Ethan, and I am a printmaker based in Fairbanks, Alaska. I earned my Bachelor of Fine Arts with a focus in printmaking from the University of Alaska Fairbanks last spring in 2019. And Chitra Ganesh selected one of my friend's titles for my comfort for IPCNY's exhibition titled Give Me Space, New Prints 2020 Summer. So I'd like to thank the International Print Center of New York and Chitra Ganesh for selecting me and supporting me. And it's great to be here to talk with other artists as well. And I guess I'll start talking about my art.
Great.
So, I'm sorry.
You're good.
So my art also heavily investigates the concept of identity. And in my specific case, it talks about my own kind of indigenous heritage and my queer identity and how that shaped my personal experiences. My work is basically a visual narrative and dialogue of my own experiences because I feel like that's the best format to kind of tell my own story. And overall, it makes my body work stronger. So for my background, I am Dinaka Kwekan Athabaskan, which is in interior Alaska. And also, I'm also Atna Athabaskan, which is in the Copper River area of Alaska, and also Tlingit in Southeast Alaska. So I have a lot of different kind of cultural backgrounds all together. And basically, I like to incorporate visual cues from my own specific cultures and combine them with visual cues that represent identity. And I kind of separated the key components of my prints, which are primarily intaglio etchings, and I create all my works on copper. So the first component of my work, I create different kind of symbols for identity. And these are figurative distortions where I kind of alter the human body. It was only recently that I started to become more comfortable with myself, and this is a process of kind of investigating my own identity that I started doing more self-portraiture. It starts to tell a much more meaningful message. I typically kind of hide facial features or distort them or create this kind of like facial void and fill it with flowers. And it's very personal to me, but it also kind of extends that experience to others who are going through similar kind of experiences. And usually the reason why I create these figurative distortions, repetition of body features, hands, arms, different parts of the body, is to kind of transfer this kind of emotion of uneasiness or being uncomfortable, because that's sort of the experience of being kind of out and open, especially as a queer indigenous person of color. It can be very uncomfortable at times to exist in a public space, and to kind of translate that emotion to the viewer is my intent behind figurative distortions. I also tend to mirror images a lot, and the reason why I mirror images, especially the figures, is because it represents the aspect of self-reflection, how you perceive yourself, what are the thoughts that are going on in your own mind about yourself, whether it be negative or positive. It's always a mixed bag of emotions. There's always self-doubt, anxiety, or maybe you just need to take the time to recuperate and heal. Another symbol for identity in my work is Alaska wildflowers, but most notably dogwood. And the dogwood is basically, sorry, there's a mosquito on my face. The dogwood flower is basically my grandmother and my mother's favorite flower. And it means a lot to me because they're the two biggest figures in my life that raised me. And it represents that family tie, but also that individual growth and acceptance of my own identity. Sometimes I would just have family members that would question my behavior or think that I was too feminine and make fun of me. But then my mom or my grandma would shut them down. So they mean a lot to me. So I like to incorporate that kind of symbol for them in my work. And then another kind of technical aspect of my work is something called foul bite, which is where you have unintentional marks that were etched in your plates. And I don't do too much to inhibit that. And the reason why I kind of go along with a lot of foul biting in my etchings is because it also represents the idea of the challenge it is to accept yourself and your own identity. And to mimic that kind of same effect in my own work is really integral to the message behind it. And so I go through this process of having a hard time figuring out my own identity and accepting myself, but also I want to translate that through my own work, where I have to go through this process of accepting whatever comes out of the etching bath. So another kind of aspect or key component behind my work is the emphasis on the idea of place or home. And with my case, places that really resonate with my memories and experiences. And these kind of experiences are representations of home or cultural sites that have like huge impacts on my own development. For example, in this kind of print on the slide, which is titled "Not Going to Disappear for Your Comfort," I incorporated the the Tlingit Totem Pole Park and Floak, and I actually took part in raising the totem pole ceremonies and carrying them, which is really cool, and it was a very formative experience. I felt very accepted there, and the reason why I integrate so much elements from my own cultural backgrounds is because they represent a form of healing for me, because normally I don't experience that feeling of being accepted or feeling safe or at home. And sometimes I take these kind of symbols of home or kind of components of the environment that speak a lot to me, which you'll probably notice in my work, like power lines. They represent a form of interconnectivity. I like to kind of composite them, sometimes abstracted, or just choose environmental backgrounds that really kind of integrate that kind of experience for me. And so the third and final kind of component for my work is the chine-colle designs that I integrate. And after I finish creating or etching my plates, I begin the drafting process of form line, chine-colle pieces, and how I want to integrate them into the composition. And they're usually always like looming in the background in the sky, kind of hiding behind the architecture. And they're always there, kind of like watching over my figures as kind of a form of strength and healing, and how important my cultural identity is to me. And kind of the process of reinvestigating my own cultural heritage, and I'm currently going through the process of learning my languages too, is really a form of healing for me and starting to find out more about my identity. Specifically, I'm learning Tlingit right now, or Tlingit, and there's no kind of gendered pronouns when we refer to other people. Like, there's just like, when you refer to somebody else, it's not gendered at all. So I think it's really cool to kind of investigate perceptions of gender identity in my own cultures, and that's just another process of kind of healing for myself. So after that, I began bringing the core themes together. I bring together the figures, the background environments, then I start to incorporate the form line designs, and then I composite them into a cohesive piece. And this is just a work in progress. Once I get access to the studio, I'm going to do the aquatint for it, which I'm excited about. So now I'm going to be talking about the print that got into the exhibition, which is titled For My Comfort. So For My Comfort is really a self-reflective piece, and it's more kind of grounded in the positive aspects of self-reflection. The background is the condominiums where my mom lives right now, and it represents kind of a safety of home. This is the backyard, so you'll notice the figures, they're much more reclined, they're relaxed, they're kind of in like comfortable clothing, and it really represents taking the time and like your own kind of space of comfort to really reflect on yourself and really engage in the process of healing and coming to terms with your own identity. And this piece really means a lot to me. It's very heavily charged personally, and I don't get too many times to really think about my identity and kind of recuperate sometimes, especially being in a public space. This is another print titled Paranoia, What Others Think About My Existence. And this one is kind of paired with the For My Comfort print. And it's the same background, but it's the front yard of the condominiums. And that is meant to represent this idea of being seen in public. And then when you're kind of self-reflecting on yourself in public, you engage more in kind of negative thoughts, self-doubt, anxiety. You're feeling you're being judged. The air around you feels super tense. And it's just this feeling of being super uncomfortable sometimes, especially if you're in kind of seen visibly in a place that can be kind of unsafe. So like the figures you see, they're kind of more in a gestural posture. It seems like they're judging you, especially with the body language. And I did that on purpose to kind of help portray that kind of emotion of feeling at unease or not being accepted. I still incorporated the chine-colle form lines and kind of like the hands. And they're there to kind of be there to reach out and kind of indicate that even though that I'm still under pressure of being seen in public, and I feel unsafe, but I am still like strong as an individual for being seen, and still like going through that process of accepting myself, no matter how many kind of negative thoughts I might be perceiving about myself at the moment. Here's kind of a comparison slide between the two to kind of see the similarities and differences, kind of the kind of emotional quality behind them. The Paranoia print seems much more heavily charged or more dramatic, and in comparison to For My Comfort. But I think the comparison slides are really helpful, especially if you're comparing two similar pieces. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the process behind my work. So usually when I divided everything separately to like kind of like the aspect of place, the aspect of the figures and their poses, and then also the Tlingit formline elements, I draft them all separately on different sheets of paper, and then I begin the process. I take them to the light table, and then I begin compositing them together. As you see in this photo, there was a different figure before. I was starting to find the idea of kind of mirroring the figures to be like not only like visually appealing to myself, but also to really engage more of that kind of theme of self-reflection. And it's really become a mainstay in many of my designs that I'm creating for future prints right now. So I basically change my designs, I make edits, I begin to composite them into one final draft and then reverse them. And then I began the process of preparing my copper matrices. And after I cut down a copper plate to size, I file it, I sand it, I degrease it and polish it. I begin the hard ground line etching process. And usually traditionally in the studio, I would use the hard ground asphaltum. But lately I've been using floor wax because during the pandemic, I need a more non-toxic method, especially working at home where there's not that much ventilation where I live. Floor wax is a much more ideal choice. Also, I don't need a hot plate for it too, which is useful. And it works perfectly as like a hard ground kind of substrate to put on my copper plates. And then I can basically begin scratching away my the line work for my designs at home. And after I finish the hard ground line etching, which I usually etch for about an hour because I like my lines to be deep and hold more ink, because one of the strongest qualities behind my work is the line quality, I will move on to the aquatint stage, which I apply a Z acrylic solution with an airbrush under a ventilation hood. And this part's difficult because I don't have a ventilation hood at home, obviously. So I'm waiting for the studio to open up to at least put down the Z acrylic ground onto my plates. But I begin this kind of stop out method with shellac in kind of intervals. I usually etch my layers in 15-second intervals, and then I will submerge it in the ferric chloride solution in a vertical etching tank. 15 seconds to get out, rinse it off, and then I kind of take a hairdryer and dry out the whole plate, and then begin shellacking the next layer. And then I'll be rinsing and repeating that process multiple times. Many of my plates, there's like kind of 20 different stop out layers, and I'll begin increasing from 15 seconds to 30 seconds to 45 seconds, the darker the values I'm trying to push for. And many times I'll repeat this process on the same plate if I'm not happy with an aquatint. I think all of us printmakers are very picky about our process and really want it to be spot on. And yeah, I'm also a really fan of the matrices that I create, and sometimes in comparison to my prints. And then I finally add the chine-colle elements, which you can see in this image right here where I'm placing on the formline cutouts, which I cut out with an X-Acto, and I color them with some pigment powders. And then I send it through the print once, and then I get my final image. So basically it's a lot of prep time to get my images. And I have like a little 15-second clip of me pulling a print because I think it really helps for viewers to kind of get a little visual, which is probably the most exciting moment for me. This was when I was doing a demo for a lot of the students of the printmaking studio in Fairbanks, Alaska. So I'm usually there to help them troubleshoot any etching questions. And then finally, I'm going to talk about my plants. So originally I was supposed to have a solo show in May 2020 in Anchorage, Alaska at the International Gallery of Contemporary Art for this body of work. And it was going to be titled For Your Comfort, which really explores the idea of presenting yourself and your own identity for another's comfort and kind of hiding those aspects. And really challenging that notion that you really shouldn't hide those aspects of your identity and really just to be yourself. It was rescheduled to May 2021 due to the pandemic, but I'm thinking about postponing even further because we'll probably need more time to kind of process everything that's happening right now. But I was pretty lucky to kind of obtain like some really good grants from the Rasmussen Foundation and the Stereo Foundation for virtual residency at the Anchorage Museum earlier this year. And it's really helping me kind of translate many of my processes to at-home printing. And so it's a good experience. So I'm beginning to kind of invest in the equipment and materials to begin printing and etching at home. So as I was talking about, the new funding is helping me kind of begin transitioning many of my stages of my process to home. And kind of here's a draft for a future print that I'm currently working on the line etching for right now. But talking about challenges for printmaking, especially for me right now, is I live in Alaska. And one of those huge challenges for me is domestic shipping restrictions. And even now, as the pandemic is progressing, there's more and more products that are like becoming higher and higher in price. Especially a lot of my painter friends are having trouble getting like mediums and paints because they're becoming too expensive. And one of those things that I have trouble getting access to is ferric chloride solution. They don't ship that domestically here, and I don't own my own business, so I can't order that like commercially. So
I wonder
my
if
best bet.
that's somewhere that I can kind of jump in with the first question that we got, which was how the pandemic has influenced your work. And obviously we're hearing a little bit about kind of the very technical side of how it's being influenced, but you know, that, but then also this questioner has asked specifically your perception of home and the public space, since you kind of spoke about with that side by side of the two prints, how kind of the like ease of being at home versus the anxiety of being out in public can kind of be a dichotomy for you.
Yeah, speaking about that more. Yeah, being at home, it's definitely a place of respite and you feel safe. And being at home is supposed to be a comfortable place to exist. And I'm not seen in public and I feel safe there. I don't have to worry about presenting myself. I guess to talk about like kind of like being dressed more comfortably, it's also a process of learning how to adjust to presenting myself comfortably in public. I live in Fairbanks, Alaska, which politically I would say it's pretty conservative. I had a lot of interesting experiences living all over Alaska with different individuals. There's definitely a lot of discrimination here, just like any other place. It's important to note that I've experienced a lot of anti-Indigenous sentiment, but also kind of anti-queer kind of behavior from people. So being seen in public, especially in kind of a small town that can be very conservative, is difficult. But it's also where most of like my Indigenous heritage and culture, or like most of like my family and a lot of people who share that culture with me live in the state. So I think it's a hard experience for a lot of us to kind of exist publicly, especially when there's a lot of kind of instances of microaggressions to macroaggressions. From the pandemic though, we're staying home a lot. That kind of definitely reduced those experiences a lot because I don't really have to like go about my like kind of experiences of commuting to the university to, you know, do my printing or to commute to work. It's kind of nice in a way. I mean, with this specific print right here, this is actually where my current residence is at, and I spent a lot of time there, especially at the pandemic. So this piece is also another self-reflective piece, but it's kind of exploring that identity and concept more. when I'm creating a piece, I'm kind of going with it and fleshing out the story behind it at the same time. So yeah. I think one of those other challenges about like being stuck at home is when you're at somewhere so comfortable, it's kind of hard to really keep engaging in your work, and it's hard to deter procrastination because if you're at like a place of comfort, it's too easy to kind of take a nap and not really focus on what needs to be focused on. So those are just some challenges. Also talking about press accessibility. Because I print with Intaglio, I need a press. So that's a pretty difficult kind of situation. Fortunately for me, the gallery that I work at has a press that I can access to that can print Intaglio copper plates. But I'm also thinking about investing in like a press for home so I can start printing there in a more safe environment because there's still some foot traffic here through the gallery. So after addressing all those kind of issues, I'm kind of going to be talking about some projects that I'm experimenting with, and I'm almost done. These are some copper cutouts, so where I cut them out with a jeweler saw, and there's a Tlingit longhouse right there and some figures, and these are just experimenting with negative space and kind of really pushing the boundaries of my work. And yeah, if anybody has any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them right now.
Okay, so we'll see usually a little bit of delay with the questions, but I can start off with a question that I was wondering, which is that looking at your work and especially kind of seeing the like early stages where you're working from the drawing and then you know, seeing it move onto the plate, you obviously like have skill and kind of precision with like drafting. And I was wondering if you, to start off with the works, if you like take photo references for the figures, or if you kind of just, you know, go for it.
All the time. I think photo references are important. I know some people might think it's cheating, but I think photo references are a really important aspect of kind of observing the world. I also like to attend a lot of like live drawing sessions with a live model because it's really important to really kind of grasp like those kind of concepts while like learning how to draw better. But yeah, for the most part, I definitely have to take a lot of photo references, especially if it's going to be self-portraiture. So I also integrate photos that other friends have taken of me, just like of us just doing normal activities, because they're really good references for just like natural kind of gestures. And then I also take photo references of my environments, and then I kind of begin playing with everything.
Great. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because I have myself like taken photo references for works, and it, you know, kind of the like posing of it can be a little tricky. So it makes a lot of sense to kind of pull from pictures that you already have to get that like normal feel.
Yeah.
So if anybody else has a question for Ethan, we can answer maybe one more now, or else we can always kind of circle back at the end. Anybody has one? Okay. Well, thank you so much. I think that now we will welcome Colin onto screen as our third and final artist. Hello.
Hello.
All right. So I just need Ethan, you two. Yeah, there you go. Unshare your screen. So now, Colin, you're
share mine here.
over to you.
Here we are. Is that working?
Yes.
All right, I still have these Q&As up. There we are. All right. Well, I guess first off, I'd just like to give a quick thanks to Megan and Chitra for organizing this, and Emma, who's in the background, you can't see, but she's pretty vital to this happening. And of course, also Golnar and Ethan. It's been really great to get to know your practices a little bit better during this. So my name is Colin Lyons, and I'm a Canadian artist based in Binghamton, New York. And I'm going to show a few projects today. One that's in front of you that's part of the show, and also one older work to give a little bit of context, and then hopefully if there's time, what I'm working on right now, which is an ongoing project that's going to be in the works for quite some time from here. But all of this work sort of fuses printmaking and site-specific installation, and is guided by two major threads. First of all is printmaking. Most of the work that you're going to see doesn't look like printmaking, but it really comes from a kind of investment into the processes and chemistry and rituals of printmaking. And the other thing is place, and specifically how it relates to landscape, industry, and history. So my recent work considers preservation in an age of planned obsolescence and resource depletion. And I'm considering sacrificial landscapes through the lens of geoengineering and urban renewal and brownfield rehabilitation. And so over the past several years, my work's really focused on the sort of remnants left behind by our industrial pursuits, and thinking about how we can preserve these or memorialize these, or in some cases, just simply moving beyond the weight of these remains. So I'm going to start off by talking about 14 plots, spill file number 0650898, which is the piece that is included in the Give Me Space exhibition. And this fragment that you see here is part of a larger site-specific installation. There we are. That is set in Rochester, New York, at a urban brownfield site. That, frankly, it's a pretty banal site. It's a looks like any other vacant piece of land. It's stuck between two buildings and a housing development on the other side. But that was one of the things that really interested me about it, was that it was this really almost neutral seeming vacant lot, but it had this really interesting history of contamination over the last several decades. And so what I realized with this place is that the reason it was empty was because it had been the site of an oil spill from an underground oil tank that was set right at the back end of the site. And that about 15 years ago, they realized that there was oil that had been leaching out of this underground oil tank. And the city of Rochester declared it a brownfield and removed 30 tons of grossly contaminated soil, which was contaminated with chemicals and oil. And so what I decided to do was dig into the archives, look at the map from the closure and surface study report, and try to create monuments for each of the test borings that were taken on site. So there was 14 tests, soil tests that were taken. I mapped those out, and then I came onto the site and collected some rubble, some granite and concrete from the nearby Inner Loop fill site, and began levigating these 14 pieces. And so using the traditional process of levigating, but instead of polishing it to a 220 grit ready for creating an image in a lithograph, what I did was I polished it to a 1500 grit. So polish it all the way to a reflective surface, more akin to a headstone or the kind of polished concrete floors in a loft. I'm sort of thinking about these as plots in two sense. Plots in being the kind of like data points that we think of when we think of environmental contamination. We often have a really cold idea about it. We don't really think of it as being we don't feel it viscerally. And so I connected that to this land as being almost akin to a kind of bodily cavity that is has been in the past filled with chemicals. And so what I did was I laser engrave each of these with the environmental contamination studies from each of these places, the exact locations, and embedded them in the exact locations of those original data plots. And so when you're going throughout the site, you kind of get a real sense of exactly what was buried in that land. And so really connecting this thing that's kind of often we think of as kind of separate from us to something that is about a very, very specific like square inch of soil. So I'm just going to show a few of the images of other ones of these so you can see a real range of these. But this process of levigating is something that I've been doing for several years now. And so this is just a performance documentation image from a piece I did out in Kamloops, BC. But I often think about levigation in a performative nature and a symbolic way, as a way of exemplifying the kind of like behind the scenes, labor intensive processes that are really central to our work as printmakers. But within these, rather than using it as a way of preparing a surface, I think of it as a way of embedding a new history of labor into the restoration process. And so trying to really bring them into that surface that's similar to a kind of headstone. But also what I'm trying to do is to kind of bring to light some of those ghosts of labor that inhabit these places. And so overall, in a more broad sense, within my practice, I tend to approach printmaking in a more conceptual lens. So rather than as a set of processes for image making, within my work, I try to leverage the discipline's embedded histories and material associations to explore overarching concepts like industry and labor, ritual, geology, ghosts, technological change. And I do this because I think that, like, historically printmaking's been really connected to industry, and there's this kind of, it's this convergence between art and industry. And so I really try to think about printmaking itself as a kind of obsolete technology. And with that in mind, I like to sort of mark the end of the edition in really deliberate ways, like soldering plates together, making batteries from them, transforming them into ruins, or at some points even dissolving them. And together I think of these as being a way of kind of creating an alchemical creation of time, of memory, or even historical aura. So the other piece I'm going to talk about is called Time Machine for Abandoned Futures, which was made in Dawson City, Yukon, which, for those that don't know, is the site of the Klondike Gold Rush, which at the turn of the 19th century, basically it was a place where thousands of people came up from mostly the west of the United States, came through the Chilkoot Pass to strike it rich. Most of them came back, empty-handed, if they came back at all. And within about 15 years, those individual speculators had been replaced by these large dredges that just started effectively tearing up the landscape, rerouting the waterways, and created what we see now, which is this kind of intestinal pile, or intestinal sort of series of tailing piles throughout the landscape. That when I went up to Dawson, I thought of this as being the kind of like authentic ruins of the Klondike, for lack of a better term. And so I wanted to create a kind of monument to those. And so as is quintessentially Klondike, I went treasure hunting. I created just started doing this pilgrimage along the tailing piles with a metal detector, excavating artifacts from the tailings, tools from these speculators from the 19th century, and then took those in tow, brought them up to the highest peak in Dawson, which is called the Midnight Dome, and created my time machine, which is a kind of printmaking based piece of architecture that doubled as a lab for restoring and etching artifacts, and a off-grid architectural form that I lived in for a couple of weeks on the mountain. And so this piece is powered by, so it's based on Earthship architecture, and is powered by a battery, which has, the power source is copper plates, zinc plates, and etching acid, which together it creates a power source to do some electrocleaning. So removing the rust and restoring these in a non-caustic way, similar to what museums do and archaeologists might do, restoring these artifacts, and then taking these artifacts and trying to give them back that history of ruination that I had taken away with the restoration process, by covering them in hard ground and inscribing all of the lost information from the color changes, the texture changes, any of that history that was lost, to create a kind of topographical map of that lost history. There's another image of me in there in the lab. The last thing I'm going to talk about briefly is what I'm doing during the COVID time, which is working in a project called the Laboratory of Everlasting Solutions, which is a printmaking-based installation that sort of is based on this sort of really, I guess you could say, really strange idea of thinking about geoengineering technologies and what if these technologies were being developed by alchemists. And so this installation here is based on the architecture of a mid-century offshore oil rig survival capsule. And the exterior of it is going to be all etched, really intricately etched stainless steel that will be containing alchemical imagery that is representing these various geoengineering proposals, both fictitious and real, that I'm going to be incorporating into this thing. So I'm just going to kind of quickly go through some of that. I'm not going to get into the geoengineering processes that are here because your eyes will glaze over. But they're, suffice to say, some of them are quite horrifying in their in how invasive they are. But they might be necessary as part of our future of climate action, and so this is part of the reason I'm dealing with these concepts. But all of this stems out of a residency I did last summer on Rabbit Island, which is in Lake Superior. It's a small 91-acre island where I was all alone, social distancing before it was the thing to do, and creating a series of, or working on a series of strange little alchemical experiments, making a illuminated manuscript that was a copy of a 1960s congressional document on climate modification using sulfuric acid that will decay and become visible over time, remote teaching before that was what we all had to do, and excavating some copper from the tailing piles in North America's oldest known copper mines, which are in the Keweenaw Peninsula. So these areas have been mined on and off for 7,000 years, and were mined by First Nations people, and much, much later by Europeans who came to North America. And so what I'm doing is I went through with the metal detector, found those kind of discards that are laced with little bits of copper, and am polishing them up and using them as my sort of base surface material that these are my etching plates that I'm going to be etching in for my next project. So there's my practice, or at least a little bit of it.
Thank you. So again, if anyone has questions, now's the time to send them in. I think kind of, a basic question, but I'm sure people are wondering, how did you get into this kind of intersection of printmaking and science and installation? Like, what is your background that the work kind of took this direction?
Yeah, I mean, it happened slowly, really slowly, in that, like Golnar, it started with an interest in the matrix, to be honest. It started with this deconstruction of the matrix, thinking about how can we go beyond, how can we think of the matrix as something that after you're done printing it is obsolete, but how do you give it a second life as something else? And so it started off, I guess you could say, just dipping my toes in it, soldering plates together, making sculptures out of the plates after I was done. But after a few years and really starting to get more interested in, I guess, industrial history and these landscapes, it sort of moved into something that sort of needed to be site-specific, needed to be dealing with the material on the ground, and dealing with the history of a very particular site. As far as the science stuff, I mean, it sort of, I think it just came organically through this in terms of my interest in industrial history. It sort of is, if you're interested in industrial history, you're interested in climate, it's only natural that you start to think about what are the possible solutions and what are the things that we hope we don't have to do. And that's where I started moving into things that are maybe more controversial avenues of science, but really thinking about these through from a really technical front.
Yeah. So we just got a question. Do you see your work within the legacy of conceptual earthworks practices of the 1960s and 70s? Which I guess this is sort of a two-part question. So there's that. And then do you have thoughts about how artists must now engage with these issues in our contemporary moment of increasing environmental precarity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, both of them, for sure. In terms of the land art movement, I mean, there are certainly some differences, perhaps in terms of just the sort of like invasiveness of what I'm doing. I try to keep when I leave, I don't want there to be a physical legacy of me having existed there, if that makes any sense. So that's one way that I think that it's different than what most 60s land artists were doing, is a more, I guess, contemporary leave no trace ethic. But certainly, I look at, Rodin's Crater, for instance, and, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I wish I made that. So definitely there is, I guess, 50 years before, but definitely I see some lineage to it in terms of just thinking about time span, in terms of the way that the land artists were often connecting their work to land and time and geology, but also even celestial events and universal time. And like really, I think there's some really interesting things that they were exploring that I often try to keep in mind with my work. What was the second part of this?
The second part was how, if you like think that artists now, I like made the question go away. Do you have thoughts on how artists must now engage with these issues in our contemporary moment of increasing environmental precarity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, certainly it's different. It's a different time, although we haven't come as far as we should have. Honestly, the dialogue around environmentalism was probably further along in the 60s and 70s than it is now, in that it became politicized. And so it became something that we haven't actually made that much progress in terms of the way that we think about environmentalism. But I think the urgency is more there. And so it can't be, or I shouldn't say it can't, but in most cases, it's not going to be primarily aesthetic. And it's also not going to be primarily thinking of time spans that are celestial time. It's usually a much more urgent time that we're talking about, because for some of these issues, like for instance Arctic ice melt, we've got 20 years, and so the solutions are a lot more urgent than we might expect, than they might have expected back in Smithson's time. So I think that's a big difference. I think there's also much more of an activist bent to artists today, in terms of the way that we discuss the work, that we present the work, and I think there may be a recognition that we maybe have to do more of the heavy lifting in terms of making clear what our intentions are, because of the fact that things get misinterpreted so much these days.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we're running a little bit over time, but I would like to invite Golnar and Ethan to come back and join us, and we'll see if any of our audience members would like to ask kind of any last questions. And please, if you're going to ask a question now, include the artist's name in your question, since if everybody comes back, we will, need to know who you're talking to. If you want to start off, I think that I'd like to ask if any of you have questions for one another, having, watched each other's presentations. The answer might be no. I think sometimes it's hard because you're focusing so much on like doing your own thing. So I guess you can think if you have any, and I'm going to ask one last one to Colin since I have it here. they wrote in the same thread as the above question, meaning the one that we had just spoken about, thinking of Duke Riley or the Biosphere 2 project in the Arizona desert, I guess meaning how did those relate to your work as well?
I mean, I'm not sure I have a great answer for that because I'm not super familiar to this particular biosphere project that you're talking about, but I'm assuming, just kind of taking a quick look, is that when we're, I guess, can this anonymous attendee sort of give a little bit more on this?
Yeah, if the person who asked the question would like to sort of specify more, maybe that would help, although I don't know. We'll see if they have more. Does anyone else have a question for one of the artists?
Can I just say something to Colin?
Yeah.
It's not really a question, but I love how everything is coming together. I don't know, I forget the term for polishing the stone.
Mm-hmm. Levigating?
Levigating is, I don't know, to me so beautiful and ritualistic. And then to, make it reflective, going back to Ethan, like a self-reflection of, what are we doing to this earth? And then inscribing with laser, it's laser, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Onto it. And, just going for kind of pure information, but there's something really hot about that. Like, and it's just so beautiful. And then the way it's just then grounded into the ground. And I mean, it's fantastic. Yeah, I also wanted to tell Ethan how I love your colors, like the gray and then like subtle pink. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also just going back to the other one, I was Googling the biosphere, and I wasn't recognizing the name Duke Riley, but the biosphere, yeah, that's, I mean, definitely thinking about these like sort of architectures that are going to be needed for the future, and sort of self-contained environments, and sort of thinking about, I mean, certainly my last project in terms of a survival capsule, I think it's really, it is quite relevant, thinking about like, are we going to need self-contained environments of some sort? How do we think about our atmosphere that's something that might have to be in some way self-contained? It's super dystopian, but I mean, some of these projects that are being developed almost have to be.
All right. Looks like people maybe used up all their questions for when we spoke to each of you after your presentation. So I want to thank you so much for joining us. And again, if anyone hasn't looked at the exhibition yet, I would encourage everyone to go through and look at the works, as well as listen to Chitra's statement or read it on the site. These were our last round of artist talks, but we will be having Instagram lives from our 2 artists in residence later in the summer, and I think even into September. So hopefully, you guys will tune in for that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.